Have you ever heard the sound of 40 adults going dead silent at once? Not shocked silence. Not even confused silence. I mean the kind where you could hear your own heartbeat over the tension. That was the sound in the conference room the moment I hit play. It was Tuesday morning, a mandatory staff meeting, the email had said, at 9 a.m. sharp in conference room B. Nearly every employee in operations, dispatch, and upper-level logistics was there. I was still technically suspended, accused of theft and under investigation. But HR had invited me to this meeting as a courtesy to present my side of the story. It was more than I expected. It was also more than Thomas expected. He was already seated when I arrived, sipping his black coffee, arms folded across his chest like a man watching his enemy sink. He didn't even flinch when I walked in, just smirked, like I was wasting everyone's time. Like he already won. But I wasn't there to defend myself. I wasn't there to cry, beg, or argue. I was there to finish what I started. Without a word, I walked up front and handed Cameron from IT a manila envelope with a USB inside. I leaned in and said quietly, "Play the file labeled March 3rd, Doc Cam 6. Then I turned to face the room and waited. The big screen flickered to life. Grainy black and white security footage appeared, showing a silent corridor near the back hallway, close to the dispatch lockers. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened, just fluorescent buzzing and empty tile. I saw some employees glance at each other in confusion, shifting in their chairs. Someone behind me whispered, "What is this?" Then, at the 46-second mark, Thomas entered the frame. He was wearing his usual navy blazer, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in one hand, earpiece tucked in like always. He didn't go to the break room or toward his office. No, he walked straight to my locker. At first, people didn't register what they were seeing, but then he pulled something out of his bag, a box of brand new Apple accessories, company property, still sealed, and crouched. He typed in a code, opened the locker, shoved the box inside, closed it again, and stood up. Then he looked directly at the camera. Not by accident. Dead on. He even adjusted his sleeve, turned, and walked away casually. It took a second, but when it hit people, it hit hard. I heard one woman say, "No freaking way," under her breath. Someone else gasped. A guy from procurement literally sat forward in his chair, eyes wide. Thomas didn't say a word. Cameron cleared his throat and turned to HR. "That footage is untouched, raw from the hallway security camera. Matches company system time codes, pulled directly from the live server." I stepped forward slowly. That hallway doesn't usually have camera coverage, but I installed a temporary system 2 weeks prior to track suspicious inventory movements. I filed it with building security. It was approved. Then I turned toward Thomas. "Funny how you didn't know that angle existed." For a moment, Thomas said nothing. He opened his mouth like he was about to claim it was fake, but even he wasn't stupid enough to say it out loud. Not with the IT guy and a full room of employees staring at a screen that had just shown him planting stolen inventory in my locker. I glanced over at Sarah from HR. "You asked if I had any evidence to support my innocence. There it is." For the past 2 weeks, I had been whispered about, side-eyed, shut out. People I worked with every day suddenly couldn't meet my gaze. I was removed from the project schedules. My name was missing from team updates. My inbox dried up like I had become radioactive. But now? Now Troy from Fulfillment was closing the Slack thread he'd been joking in when I walked in. I saw it. I saw his face shift. That mix of guilt and fear people get when they realize they backed the wrong horse. The room wasn't just silent. It was stunned. And I wasn't finished. Because that footage, that was only one incident, one box, one camera. But it wasn't the only time he had done it. I had more. Other dates, other angles, and I was about to play them next. But before I do, let me take you back. Before the cameras, before the setup, before Thomas thought he could bury my name in theft accusations. I was a respected operations lead, smart, precise, quiet. And for some reason, that made me a threat. Here's how it all started. 6 months before that meeting, I was on top of my game. I'd just been promoted to operations lead after 2 years of quietly outperforming every metric in our logistics division. I wasn't flashy, didn't play the office politics game, and I wasn't the type to hang around after hours clinking drinks with executives at happy hour. I just did the work, better, faster, and with more precision than anyone else on the floor. The promotion wasn't even announced formally, just an email from HR on a Thursday afternoon. Effective immediately, Maya Torres will take over day-to-day operations reporting and oversee inventory reconciliation processes. That was it. No handshake, no celebratory cake in the break room. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for attention. I just wanted my work to speak for itself. Thomas, however, noticed. He'd been the senior logistics manager for nearly a decade, charismatic, loud, the kind of guy who always had an inside joke going with the VPs. Everyone knew him. Everyone laughed a little too hard at his meetings. At first, I thought he was harmless, just one of those big personality types who thought sarcasm was a management style. But things changed quickly after my promotion. At first, it was subtle. He'd forget to include me on update emails, redirect questions from my team back to himself. Then came the corrections. Every week, he'd find some small flaw in my reports, some insignificant detail, like using the wrong shade of blue in a chart or not bolding a subtotal cell in Excel. And he'd point it out loudly, always in front of others. I kept brushing it off. I told myself he was just being thorough, that maybe he felt threatened and this was his way of asserting control. I didn't want drama. I wanted efficiency. I stayed in my lane. But then the rumors started. First, it was whispers about someone on my team misplacing scanners. Then small things began to go missing, cordless mouse kits, handheld inventory readers, even a few tablets. Each time it was written off as a miscommunication or warehouse mix-up. But the missing items were always from areas my team touched, and I started to get the sense that people were being told to double-check my sections more than others. It didn't help that Thomas would conveniently remind me during team meetings that we needed to tighten up loss prevention, and then glance toward me with that irritating half-smile of his. Once, he even joked, "Maybe we should start checking each other's lockers," and everyone laughed. I laughed too, but my hands were clenched under the table. Still, I had no proof, and honestly, I thought maybe I was being paranoid, so I worked harder, stayed late, cleaned up everyone's reporting to avoid any chance of a mistake that could be used against me. But the accusations kept creeping in, like smoke under a door. HR flagged a pattern of missing items and requested an internal audit. It wasn't formal yet, but it was enough for me to feel the shift. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. Coworkers I used to joke with barely made eye contact. My friend Kim in supply chain stopped replying to texts. Even the building security guy who always waved in the morning started giving me a curt nod instead. Then one afternoon, I returned from lunch to find my locker slightly ajar. I never leave it open, ever. Inside, nothing looked out of place, but something about it gave me a knot in my stomach. I checked the items. Everything seemed untouched, but that same evening, a box of wireless keyboards went missing from receiving, and the next day, HR sent me a calendar invite, suspension pending investigation. No warning, no sit-down chat. Just a hallway confrontation with Sarah from HR and 2 supervisors escorting me to clear my desk. I remember the looks from people as I packed up my things. Some averted their eyes, others whispered. Thomas stood at the far end of the hallway, arms crossed, watching. He didn't look surprised, and I finally understood. This wasn't about missing tech or minor losses. This was calculated, planned. Someone was planting items, shifting suspicion, and isolating me piece by piece. So I did what no one expected. I stayed quiet. I left the building with my head up, and the next day I filed a quiet request with building security to temporarily test a supplemental tracking camera in the hall near the lockers for inventory flow research, I called it. I even paid for the device myself and signed a waiver taking responsibility for installation. They approved it without a second thought. And I waited. Because if Thomas was bold enough to do it once, he'd do it again. The email arrived at 7:48 a.m. the following Monday. Subject line, urgent. Formal suspension notification. Security protocol required. No salutation. No small talk. Just a curt paragraph informing me that due to irregularities found in recent asset control reports and witness accounts suggesting potential misconduct, I was being placed on unpaid leave, effective immediately. It also said that an internal review was underway, and I was expected to return all company devices within 24 hours. There was no mention of what I supposedly did. No meeting invitation, just cold, clinical language. The kind companies use when they've already decided you're guilty. I read the email 3 times. I felt nothing. Not shock, not fear. Just a strange, hollow calm, like a chess player watching a trap finally spring into place. At 8:15 a.m., I walked into the building with my badge still working. I handed over my laptop and key fob to the security desk. Darren, the security lead, looked down at the items without speaking. He didn't offer a smile, didn't ask questions. He slid a clipboard toward me like I was a UPS driver dropping off a package. I signed. The worst part? The silence. That thick, awkward silence of people pretending not to watch you. I saw 3 coworkers at their desks pretending to look busy while clearly eyeing me over their monitors. One woman from accounting actually turned her chair so she wouldn't have to make eye contact. As I turned the corner toward my cubicle to collect a few personal items, Thomas emerged from his office. He had the nerve to look surprised. "Oh, Maya, didn't expect you so early," he said, voice smooth as ever. HR said they were handling the return process. "I'm just here to collect my plants," I said flatly. He nodded, too fast. "Of course, no problem at all. Just, you know how these things go. Formalities." He shrugged, like he wasn't the one who started this fire. But I could see it in his eyes. Panic, carefully masked by overconfidence. I took my small potted aloe, a photo frame with my niece, and a ceramic mug I'd had since my first week. As I walked out, Thomas added, "Hope it all clears up soon. Really do." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in my bag, zipped inside a felt-lined pouch, was a copy of the security footage. That camera I installed? It had already captured what I needed. I'd reviewed it the night before, every frame. I sat in my apartment with the lights off watching Thomas enter that locker hallway like he owned the place, checking over his shoulder and placing stolen items inside my locker like he was dropping breadcrumbs in a forest. He did it twice. 2 separate days, 2 different boxes, both with his sleeves rolled just enough to show the same leather watch I'd seen him wear every day. I backed up the files to a flash drive, a cloud account, and a portable hard drive, then locked everything in a drawer. But I didn't go to HR, not yet, because I wanted this to land in front of everyone. Not just an email exchange or a private meeting where he could spin a narrative. I wanted a room full of employees, the ones who whispered, the ones who ghosted me, the ones who laughed behind my back, to see it with their own eyes, no filters, no denials. So when Sarah from HR reached out 2 days later, asking if I wanted to attend a formal response meeting to close the investigation, I responded with 2 words: I accept. She said I could bring any evidence I had to support my case. I said I would. She sounded mildly disappointed, as if she'd expected me to vanish quietly. They scheduled it for the following Tuesday, 9 a.m. Conference Room B. Attendance optional, but strongly encouraged for all department members. And I knew right then that was the moment. The perfect audience. The perfect setup. Let them come, curious and ready to gossip. Let Thomas lean back in his chair, thinking I'd show up crying or ranting or folding under pressure. Let them think whatever they wanted, because the only thing they needed to know was what would appear on that screen. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 15 minutes early. The conference room was already half full. Department heads, warehouse leads, junior staff, and a few people who had no reason to be there except curiosity. I recognized every face. People I'd worked alongside for years. Most of them avoided eye contact. I took a seat near the front, not at the head of the table, but close enough to see Thomas clearly when he walked in. He arrived exactly on time, dressed to impress, wearing his usual smug confidence-like armor. He greeted a few people, even chuckled at a private joke someone whispered, like none of this concerned him. I watched him carefully, noting the way he avoided looking at me even once. Sarah from HR took her place at the front. She opened with the standard line, "We're here today to formally address the unresolved concerns regarding inventory loss and the investigation into procedural violations." Her voice was flat, emotionless. She gestured toward me without even using my name and added, "Maya has requested time to share a personal statement and any materials she believes relevant." I stood, calm and composed, and handed a manila envelope to Cameron, the IT rep. "There's a USB inside. Please play the file labeled March 3rd, camera 6. As the lights dimmed slightly and the projector hummed to life, a hush fell over the room. On screen, the grainy black and white footage of the corridor near the locker area flickered into view. At first, it was just the hallway, nothing moving. The room seemed puzzled. I didn't explain. I just let the footage play. Then, Thomas entered the frame. The murmurs started almost immediately. Small gasps, eyebrows raised. He walked straight to my locker, box in hand, and knelt. The timestamp was visible in the corner. He opened the door, placed the equipment inside, then turned and looked directly into the lens. That part stunned people. The silence that followed was heavier than any words I could have spoken. When the clip ended, I said nothing. I simply nodded toward Cameron and whispered, "Next file, March 7th. This time, the footage came from a different angle, a second hallway camera positioned just behind the lockers. It showed Thomas again. Same routine, different day, a new box, a glance around. Same code punched into my locker, a repeat performance. By now, the mood in the room had shifted entirely. People weren't just watching, they were staring. Sarah leaned forward in her seat, visibly tense. A few people exchanged glances like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One man actually whispered, "Holy sh!" loud enough for others to hear. I turned back to the room and finally spoke. 2 weeks before the audit, I requested permission from building security to install temporary observation cameras near the storage hallway. The request was approved and documented. I held up a printed copy of the signed permission form. I installed and funded the cameras myself because I knew something was wrong. I had no idea it would be this. Thomas was pale now. The blood had drained from his face, and his mouth was slightly open, like he was still trying to find a script to follow. Sarah finally turned to him. "Do you have any response to this footage?" He didn't answer. I didn't wait. The boxes he placed in my locker were among the very items reported missing. Their serial numbers matched the flagged inventory list. The implication was that I was stealing them. I let the silence stretch. No one spoke. No one moved. I looked out over the room and made eye contact with several coworkers, people who had avoided me for weeks. I didn't need apologies. I didn't want them. I just needed them to see. Sarah cleared her throat and spoke, her voice suddenly less robotic. "Cameron, please stop the playback. We're going to end this session now and resume with legal present." Her eyes flicked to Thomas, who still hadn't moved. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding, not from fear, but release. I had carried this weight silently for weeks. I had watched my reputation unravel, and now, finally, the burden had shifted. Security entered the room 5 minutes later. They didn't storm in like a movie scene, but they didn't tiptoe either. 2 uniformed guards approached Thomas, said a few quiet words, and asked him to come with them. He stood slowly, mechanical, like he hadn't yet processed the fact that he was no longer in control. He didn't look at me as he left. He looked down at the floor the entire time. When the door clicked shut behind him, no one spoke. Not for a long time. Then, from the far side of the room, someone started clapping. It wasn't dramatic or mocking, just a slow, sincere rhythm. A moment later, someone else joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the room was full of applause. For me. For the truth, for the justice of it all. And I stood there, not smiling, not triumphant, just steady. Because I hadn't come for applause. I hadn't come to make a scene. I'd come to clear my name, and now that it was done, I was finally free. The morning after the meeting, my inbox was flooded. Some emails were formal. Subject lines like, apologies on behalf of the team, or recent misunderstandings. People scrambling to smooth things over. Others were more personal. A short line from Kim in supply chain. I should have spoken up. I'm sorry. A longer message from Jonathan, one of the newer hires. I always knew something felt off. You didn't deserve what they did to you. I didn't reply to most, not out of pettiness, just clarity. I didn't need validation from the same people who had vanished when it mattered. I hadn't cleared my name for them. I'd done it for me. HR called a formal all-staff meeting that Friday to address structural concerns and rebuild trust. Sarah read from a carefully prepared statement announcing an investigation into internal misconduct, misuse of authority, and breach of asset control protocol. They didn't say Thomas's name. They didn't need to. He never returned. Rumors swirled for weeks that he'd been escorted off the premises, that police were involved, that legal was negotiating a settlement to avoid criminal charges. I didn't ask. I didn't care. What mattered was that he was gone. His shadow had finally lifted. The company offered me reinstatement 2 days later, full salary retroactive, a public apology in writing, and an upgraded role in inventory integrity leadership. They framed it as a second chance to help shape culture, as if I owed them the favor. I turned it down. That afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman named Colleen introduced herself, vice president of operations for a rival logistics firm. She'd been forwarded a summary of the incident by a mutual contact and had watched the leaked footage that had somehow ended up in a private industry Slack channel. Her tone was direct. "We don't just admire how you handled yourself," she said. "We want to hire you to rebuild our entire asset control division. Blank check, full autonomy, whatever you need." I said I'd consider it. She replied, "We'll send over an offer, but just know, people like you don't come around often, the kind who stay calm when it's easier to burn everything down." I ended up accepting her offer 2 weeks later, not because of the money, though it was generous, not even because it would annoy my former employer to lose me to a competitor, but because it felt right, clean, honest, a place where my work would be valued, not because I demanded it, but because it was impossible to ignore. I left quietly, no big farewell post, no victory lap. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. But on my last day in town, I did one thing. I stopped by the old office building, just for a moment. I parked across the street, looked up at the familiar windows, and watched as the sun hit the glass in all the places I used to dread. Then I smiled, not out of triumph, but relief. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't a dramatic explosion. It's walking away with your dignity intact, your truth unshaken, and your next chapter already waiting.